All right, welcome back. We're picking up right where we left off in our last deep dive, continuing to pull on the threads that shape our world today. And this time, we're going to connect the dots between two places you might not think are related, the classroom and the halls of power. We're going to look at how an education system, maybe the one you went through, might have been designed for one thing, and in the process, made us all vulnerable to something else entirely.
So, let's just jump right in with a massive question, one that the incredible educator Sir Ken Robinson once asked. Do schools kill creativity? I mean, you know that feeling, right? You start school just buzzing with ideas, with imagination, and then somewhere down the line, that spark just kind of dims. The real question is, was that an accident, or was it the whole point?
Sir Ken argued that, yeah, schools absolutely kill creativity, and not by some unfortunate mistake. No, he said it was by design. And he used this quote from Picasso that just hits the nail on the head. We all start out as artists. As kids, we're not afraid to take a guess, to try something new, to be wrong. And then we go to school.
So how exactly does this happen? Well, think back. First, there's a strict hierarchy of what's important. Math, top of the list. History, somewhere in the middle. Dance, yeah, that's at the bottom. The entire system is obsessed with finding that one single right answer. And making a mistake? Oof, that's treated like the absolute worst thing you can possibly do. So what's the result? You get these amazingly talented, creative kids who start to think they're stupid, just because the thing they're great at isn't valued by the system.
And what you end up with is adults who are terrified of being wrong. That fearless innovator you were as a kid, that capacity gets systematically stamped out. The takeaway here is just brutal. We don't grow into our creativity. We are literally educated out of it.
So you have to ask, was this just a really, really bad side effect? Or was this whole system actually built to do something completely different? Well, let's dig into the history a little bit, because this is where things get pretty wild.
So, the sources we dug into are pretty clear on this. The modern American public school system, it wasn't some homegrown idea. It was an import from 19th century Prussia. Turns out, the guy known as the father of American public education, Horace Mann, went over there, saw how they were creating obedient soldiers and factory workers, and thought, hey, we need that. He brought it back, and by 1900, it had spread across the entire country.
And they weren't exactly subtle about what they were trying to do. Just read this quote from one of the architects of the Prussian model. The goal was to, and I'm quoting here, destroy free will, to make students incapable of thinking for themselves. I mean, wow, this wasn't just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. There was a hidden curriculum, compliance.
Okay, so you've got the blueprint for a system of obedience, but how do you actually get millions of people to internalize it? How do you make it stick? Well, it turns out there's a pretty powerful psychological tool for that, one that explains how you can literally engineer apathy on a massive scale.
It's called learned helplessness, and it's exactly what it sounds like. If you're put in a stressful situation over and over and over again, and you have zero control over the outcome, you eventually just give up. You learn that nothing you do matters, so you stop trying, even when you could actually change things.
Psychologists proved this with a really simple and kind of cruel experiment. Imagine this. You take two groups of students. You give one group puzzles that are impossible. They can't solve them, they start to feel dumb, confused, and their confidence is just completely shot. Then you give them an easy puzzle, one they could definitely solve. But you know what happens? Most of them don't even try. They've already learned to be helpless.
And that is the long-term payoff. You take generations of kids, you teach them to be afraid of being wrong, you teach them to follow instructions without question, and you don't just get good workers, you get an entire society steeped in a climate of compliance.
The sources we're looking at draw this incredibly stark line in the sand. I mean, think about the 1960s and 70s. You had these massive, passionate youth movements taking to the streets, challenging authority at every turn. Could you imagine if the government back then tried to pull some of the stuff we see today? The country would have erupted. But now, some argue we have a population conditioned by this learned helplessness, one that's far less likely to mount that same kind of collective resistance.
The philosopher Roderick just captured this sense of apathy perfectly. He basically asked, when you have a system that grinds people down like this, why on earth are we surprised when you get a generation that seems to feel nothing and want nothing? It's not some kind of moral failure. According to this view, it's the system working exactly as intended.
So, this is where it all comes together. This is the scary part. What happens when you have this widespread climate of compliance, and it collides with a rise in authoritarian politics?
Well, you get the perfect breeding ground for an authoritarian state to seize power, without much of a fight. Sources point to what looks like a two-pronged strategy. First, you attack public education itself. You see things like massive proposed budget cuts, attacks on programs like special education, or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The goal, they argue, is to weaken the very institutions that could create a population of critical thinkers.
And then, at the same time, you have these political actions that would have been unthinkable to previous generations. Things like sending federal troops into cities against the will of local leaders, or purging government agencies of anyone who isn't seen as personally loyal. In a climate of compliance, these moves just don't face the same level of outrage or organized resistance they would have in the past.
And this is the end game. This is where the two threads tie together. It's not a coincidence. This quote really says it all. If you want to be able to say whatever you want without being challenged, you need a population that hasn't been taught how to challenge you. It's a feature, not a bug.
And that leaves us with a really, really tough question to sit with. What if the very system that was supposed to prepare us for democracy has actually made us uniquely vulnerable to its biggest threats? If we've all been educated in a system of obedience, a system that taught us not to question, not to be wrong, how do we unlearn all of that? How do we reclaim the courage and the creativity we need to actually stand up and fight for a democracy that works?